There was a website. You couldn't find it on Google. You couldn't stumble into it by accident. You had to know it existed. And once you were inside, you realized something unsettling. This wasn't just a website. It was a world operating by completely different rules. A place where identity didn't matter, where money moved without permission, and where almost anything could be bought. In the early 2010s, the internet was already everywhere. People searched, shared, connected. But beneath that familiar surface, there was another layer, quieter, hidden. A place where anonymity wasn't optional, it was expected. And inside that hidden world, something began to grow. It was called Silk Road, a digital marketplace, but unlike anything before it. There were no companies behind it, no official oversight, just users, buying, selling, trusting a system that technically didn't exist. Bitcoin made it possible, a currency that moved freely, without banks, without borders, without names.
At the center of it all was Ross Ulbricht, but he didn't start as a criminal. He started with ideas, strong ones. He believed people should be free to make their own choices, without interference, without control. Before Silk Road became a marketplace, it was just a thought, a question. What if people could interact freely, without systems deciding for them? To him, control wasn't protection, it was limitation. And the more he thought about it, the more real that idea became. At first, it was small, a simple post online, a link shared quietly, a few people exploring something new. There was no guarantee it would work, no certainty at all, just an idea, slowly becoming real. Using Silk Road wasn't easy. That was intentional. You had to know how to access it, where to go, how to move through a space that wasn't built for everyone. And once inside, everything felt different. No real names, no identities, just usernames, temporary, replaceable, like shadows interacting with other shadows. Trust worked differently too. It wasn't about who you were, it was about what you did. Transactions, reviews, patterns, a system built entirely on digital trust. And somehow, it worked. People started joining, more and more, thousands of users, listings growing every day. What started as an experiment became something bigger, a marketplace, then a system. Millions of dollars began moving through Silk Road, not slowly, not cautiously, but constantly. At any given moment, transactions were happening, people buying, people selling, money flowing in a system that wasn't supposed to exist. Bitcoin, at the time, was still something most people didn't understand. But inside Silk Road, it wasn't just currency. It was something else entirely. It was distance. Distance from banks, from governments, from rules people had always assumed were permanent. And that changed everything. Because when money moves without permission, control begins to disappear. And when control disappears, something replaces it. Power. Not the kind you see, not the kind people talk about openly, but the kind that builds quietly, in systems, in numbers, in influence that no one can fully measure. At the center of it all was Ross Ulbricht, watching it grow, not just as a creator, but as the only person who truly understood what it was becoming. Because this wasn't just a website anymore. It was a system moving millions without asking anyone for permission. And systems like that don't stay small.
At first, it was easy to ignore, to believe that Silk Road was still what it was meant to be, a space for freedom, a system without control.
But systems don't stay pure forever. They change, slowly, almost quietly. New listings began to appear. Not shocking at first, just different. Then more and more, until the difference was impossible to ignore. What people were buying was no longer just controversial, it was dangerous. And the platform didn't stop it. It couldn't, because that was the idea from the beginning. No control, no limits, no intervention. But reality doesn't work like that. Behind every listing, there was a real person, a real decision, a real consequence. And those consequences didn't stay on the screen. They existed somewhere else, in real places, with real outcomes. And that's when the line disappeared. The line between an idea and its impact. Because it's easy to believe in freedom when it's just a concept. But when that freedom allows anything, everything changes. And maybe that's the moment when Silk Road stopped being an experiment and became something else entirely, something no one could fully control anymore.
At some point, something changed. Not in the system, but in him. Because Silk Road was no longer just an idea. It wasn't just code. It wasn't just a platform. It was real. Every transaction meant something. Every listing led somewhere. And even if he couldn't see it directly, he knew it existed. Consequences. The kind you don't think about when everything is just theoretical. At the beginning, it was easy to separate things, to believe that this system itself was neutral, that it simply gave people a choice. But over time, that belief becomes harder to hold, because when something grows, it stops being just an idea. It becomes responsibility. And responsibility is heavy, especially when the system you created no longer reflects what you originally believed. At that point, there's a question that can't be avoided anymore. Not, can I continue this? But, should I? And sometimes, the hardest part isn't building something. It's realizing you might have created something you can't control anymore. While Silk Road continued to grow, someone else was starting to notice. Not the public, not the media, but the people trained to look for what shouldn't exist. The FBI. At first, it didn't make sense. A hidden marketplace operating at that scale, handling millions without being shut down? It sounded impossible. But impossible things have a way of becoming real when you look at them closely enough. So they started looking, quietly, carefully, because this wasn't a normal case. There were no fingerprints, no physical evidence, no clear identity, just a system designed to hide everything. But even the most careful systems are built by people, and people make mistakes. Small ones, almost invisible, the kind you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for them. So that's exactly what they did. They didn't chase the platform, they studied it. Patterns, timing, behavior, how often it was accessed, when activity increased, what language was used. Because sometimes finding someone isn't about breaking the system, it's about understanding the person behind it. And slowly, a pattern began to form, not complete, not perfect, but enough to point in a direction. A username here, an old post there, a detail that didn't quite fit until it did. And that's when the investigation changed, because it was no longer about a hidden marketplace. It was about a person, someone real, someone who existed outside the system he created. And once you find that, everything starts to unravel. By 2013, the investigation had changed. This was no longer about a website. It was about a person. Someone who had built something the world wasn't supposed to have. And for the first time, they were close. Not to shutting it down, but to him, Ross Ulbricht. But there was a problem. They couldn't just arrest him. Not yet.
because everything depended on one thing: the laptop. If it closed, if it locked, if even a second was lost, everything could disappear. Years of investigation, gone. So they waited, not for hours, not for days, but for the right moment. A moment of distraction, a moment where control would slip just enough. And when it finally happened, it didn't look dramatic. It was quiet. A public library, people around him, normal life continuing, completely unaware of what was about to happen. He was sitting there, focused, connected, still in control, or at least he thought he was. And then, everything moved at once. Agents approached, fast, precise. No hesitation, because this wasn't just an arrest, it was the only chance. They needed that laptop, open, unlocked, active. 1 second, he was running one of the most unknown empires on the internet. The next, it was over. No escape, no time to react, no way to undo what had been built. Just a moment where the digital world collided with the real one. And for the first time, there was no anonymity left.
After the arrest, everything moved into the real world. No more anonymity, no more hidden systems, just a courtroom. And a question that wasn't easy to answer. Who was Ross Ulbricht, really? A criminal? A mastermind? Or something more complicated? Because what he created wasn't just illegal, it was different. Silk Road wasn't a traditional operation. It wasn't built for chaos. It was built on an idea about freedom, about choice, about a world without control. But in court, ideas don't matter the same way. Actions do. The charges were serious: money laundering, drug trafficking, conspiracy. And behind every charge, there was something real: consequences. The trial didn't last forever, and when the sentence came, it was final. Life in prison, no possibility of release, a permanent ending to something that started as an idea. But Silk Road didn't disappear completely, because it proved something: that systems like this can exist, that technology can create spaces outside of control, outside of rules people assume will always be there. And that changes everything, because once something is possible, it doesn't disappear, it evolves. Today, the internet is even more connected, more advanced, more powerful, but also more uncertain, because the same tools that create opportunity can also create risk, and the same ideas that promise freedom can lead somewhere else entirely. A young man had an idea. He built something the world wasn't ready for. For a moment, it worked perfectly, until it didn't.
And maybe the real question isn't why Silk Road existed, but how many systems like it are already out there, growing quietly, waiting to be discovered.
This is For Real.